Hello and welcome to our happy hour talk. It will be our last happy hour talk for this year. And we are very happy to have the guests from the Big Idea Ventures based off Singapore. I'm going to introduce them very soon, but hello, Dalal and Mathew. And my name is Lucia. I am lead at a Green Hospitality. Together with me here today is Eliana, who's going to be helping to manage the chat. So if you have any questions, she's going to be tending to you, making sure we respond to the questions later on in the Q&A. And I'd like to introduce to those of you who are maybe joining for the first time, just in few words, Green Hospitality. And we are a platform that really works across supply chain with different hospitality businesses, but also their suppliers. And we have three pillars or three things how we try to make change or make an impact. We look at knowledge and knowledge sharing. We build the knowledge and we share the knowledge that we achieve through our research. And then we share it through different using different channels, such as our reports or guides that you can find on our website. But we also run these happy hour talks to share more knowledge with you. We have other events. Some of you might have attended the Green Hospitality Conference about a month ago. And we have an upcoming hackathon event in end of November. So that's going to be another opportunity for us to share the knowledge. Then we focus on collaborations, so building partnerships with different players in the industry. And that naturally leads into sustainable solutions. So what we're looking for really is to understand through our research and then share the knowledge, build collaborations that will provide feasible solutions to the industry to be really the catalyst for sustainability. So that's very briefly about us. Obviously, you can find much more on our website. We will be sharing that with you in the follow-up. And now let me go into introductions for our guests today. So I'd like to introduce first, in general, the Big Idea Ventures, which is actually a venture capital firm that invests in future food technologies in the alternative protein ecosystem. And first guest, we have two today, is Dr. Dalal Alghawas. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it well. And Dr. Dalal is the program director at Big Idea Ventures. Her expertise includes clinical and animal research, diagnostics, public health, food science, and biotechnology. Dalal has helped to establish the first food technology accelerator program in Hong Kong and has worked with over 25 global technology startups with special focus on plant-based protein alternatives, cellular agriculture, sustainability, smart kitchen equipment, medtech, and software. She holds a Doctor of Philosophy, Food Science, and Technology from the University of Hong Kong. So actually, we are streaming from the University of Hong Kong, from your alma mater. So hopefully we can present also the proud alumna of the school. So hello, Dalal. Thank you for joining us. And
thank you so much for having me.
And then we have Mathew. So Dr. Mathew Zhao, is that correct, Wayne?
Yeah, you're right.
Great. So Mathew is the food scientist at Big Idea Ventures, and his technical expertise includes post-harvest technology, food packaging and processing, and shelf life evaluation. Under his guidance, several companies were successful in adopting innovative novel technology, solutions, and processes to commercialize their product with better nutritional value, a stable shelf life, among other value-added functional properties. He holds a PhD in food technology from Mathew University, New Zealand. Wow, so very impressive pedigree, both of you. Very pro. So we're expecting obviously a lot of good stuff today. So of course, I don't come from the same background. My background is more on sustainable tourism and sustainable hospitality. And I think I want to make that connection between why we're talking about the alternative protein, right, and the hospitality industry. So we all eat, and definitely we all go to eat in restaurants, or when we go on vacation or we go to a hotel, there will be some food served to us. And lots of people now, those who are aware of the environment, are definitely considering their diet and the impact of their diet um, on the climate crisis and greenhouse effects that the breeding of animals has or the crops has. So there's lots of innovation going on with regards to alternative proteins and alternative meats specifically. So we have different types like lab grown meat, and you will know better than me, but that's what I know. And different alternatives that some people might like and some people might not like that much. So I think that's going to be the discussion today, because we might get these things served, and they are already getting prominent on the menus in different restaurants around the world. So I think it's a good exploration for us all to do, and then also consider whether the hospitality businesses should adopt faster or not, and what is available on the market. So we have kind of brainstormed some areas that we would like to talk about today, and so I'll just like start with the basics. So what alternative protein products actually exist right now, and how are they designed or produced? Could you maybe give us like an elevator pitch or introduction to alternative protein space?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. So yeah, thanks again for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be a part of the Green Hospitality Happy Hour talks. This is a huge question, so I'll try to simplify it as best as possible. Let's say meat analogs, or let's say alternatives to meat, dairy, and seafood have been around for millennia. But of course, now what's happened is they've become more, let's say, sophisticated. So in the past, especially like in Asia, right? Like we're so used to having let's say meat alternatives made from tofu, and then you have in India as well, utilizing all types of legumes as well as ingredients like jackfruit to emulate, let's say, the texture of meat. So this has been around for quite some time, but what's happened in the last few years is they've become very sophisticated and very trendy. And that means that the technology has changed, the textures, the flavor has really improved quite significantly, and the branding has become more sexy. So once that happened, it kind of like took off, and you have like also a very large growing movement of, let's say, conscious consumerism, as well as a growing, let's say, vegan consumer base. And just to mention as well, let's say plant-based products are not only targeted at vegans, they're targeted for everyone. So everyone is jumping on the bandwagon. And, let's say the majority of consumers are flexitarians. So that's people who eat vegetables and meat. They're not necessarily vegetarians. So yeah, in terms of the category, I mean, they're developing plant-based analogs out of everything, from cereals, grains, fruits, and then you have, let's say the other sort of side, which is biotechnology, which is utilizing stem cell culture to create all types of cell lines that can disrupt everything from dairy in terms of beverages or even cheese. And then you have, of course, like seafood and all different seafood byproducts. And then also, of course, meat, right, in terms of its structure. And with this technology, it's very interesting because you can grow a specific cell line. So if you want only sort of muscle tissues, fat tissues, connective tissue, or even like collagen, you can be very specific. So I think this is what's happened now. Just people are really leveraging the latest advancements in technology to revamp the food supply system. I don't know, Dr. Mathew, is there anything else you'd like to add as well?
Yeah, I guess Dr. Dalal has covered a lot of plant-based, looking at different ingredients, legumes, beans, and different fruits, vegetables to get the right plant protein resource. Another areas that probably caters on to the alternative protein also looks into cell-based, where they look into identifying the cell line, looking at how they can extract a particular cells, and then they can cultivate it and create their biomass, eventually achieving the proteins that's required. So recently you have seen a lot of companies that are looking into the cell line, looking at cell-based technology to really create their own cell-based product. Not just looking at the type of cell line, they also look into how to look at the biomaterials like the scaffoldings, like even look look at the growth factors and growth media so that they can use a more sustainable approach to create the protein sources instead of slaughtering animals. So that's something that has been working a lot over the years, and I do believe that from more years to come, they're definitely going to have more cell-based products, and then you can probably oversee cell-based product in the commercial or in the retail side, where they're slowly replacing the amount of animals that is or the animal protein that's currently used. Definitely there's going to be a portion of it coming from plant and also another portion coming from the cell-based category. So I think that's something that myself, I do look forward to it as well and see how things are going to change.
Good introduction. I think we kind of covered both sides. So rightly, so you said there is already lots and lots of people consuming, but in different, it didn't look like meat or it didn't look like cheese, but the protein is actually in other types of foods as well. So it's not only whatever we think is the real protein, like the meat or the cheese or the dairy. It's in other parts of our diet. It just doesn't look like or doesn't have the same texture as the protein from the animals. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you are really right with the notion of these alternatives are really made for people who are not necessarily vegans or vegetarians, because I was always thinking, if I am vegetarian or vegan, then I probably don't want to eat meat. I don't want anything that has a texture of meat anyways, because it just doesn't make me feel comfortable, even if I know it's fake. And so there's lots of that. I experienced it in Singapore, that they would give you the alternative some alternative seafoods from something, and then the texture, it was all shaped. It was not alternative protein, but it was just a tofu, and it was all shaped like seafood. And I was thinking, I don't want something that looks like a shrimp, because I don't want to eat shrimp, right? But I think for the meat eaters, it's very important that the texture is there. It's also part of the experience. I think our mind really needs that in order to accept it sometimes, or actually even enjoy it. So that's what I hear a lot from my non-vegetarian friends. They need and they want the texture, right? That feeling of it being a meat. And so how do you in Big Idea Ventures actually aid in plant-based and cell-based protein alternative startups? What do you exactly do? Can you tell us more?
Yeah, probably I can start first by giving a bit of idea of what do we do with our portfolio companies in Big Idea Ventures. So what we do have is the portfolio companies that we have. We do help them in terms of trying to address the technical challenges that they face. For instance, on the startup companies, when they brainstorm, they have innovative techniques or technology to create their product. Typically, they do create a prototype, which is a small scale quantity. So they try to refine the taste, the texture, like for instance, getting as close as a meat, or trying to remove the peely taste of coming from the plant-based protein. Also trying to make sure that when you eat it, it tastes or get the right texture, the chewiness, and that is required. So there's a lot of different components that they have to look into and really to understand how they can create the best product. And also to really to understand as well what the consumer wants as well, because consumers are the ultimate buyers, and they are the one to decide whether this tastes good or not and what they really look for. So definitely the companies that we have the portfolio company that spend a lot of time doing their research, doing product development, looking at what sort of things they can edit in, and work with different key industry partners that we help them to link them together so that they can get the right assistance and support from the key industry partners as well. So that's also one of the start of it, and then eventually they have to think about moving from a lab scale to a pilot scale, and eventually the manufacturing scale. So this, even though shifting from pilot to manufacturing scale, definitely you do expect a lot of changes to be happening, because you're not going to be cooking the product in the kitchen, like what you're using a small pots and pans and oil and stuff to do. Looking at manufacturing scale, for instance, producing more than a ton of products and stuff, you have to look at equipment and what sort of equipment that's required, and how do you think that you have to cook it so that the product eventually will not just taste good and have the right nutritional content, but also is safe for consumption. So that's the key thing that our companies wants to achieve. Definitely it's going to have some change in texture or the flavor component, and we have to try to see how we can help to manage the expectation on it, and also to work with different co-manufacturers out in Singapore or even in anywhere, so that they can produce the product that they want and also to achieve the texture and properties that they require. So this is something that we do come in to help them, to assist them. And I think the key thing that we also need to work with the companies is to look at the sensory evaluation. So we want to make sure that the products that they do is what the consumer is looking for. And they don't spend so much time trying to recreate it and try to improve it. Whereas in fact, the product is really what the consumer thinks is so good. Because to hit the market is, to get the fastest way to hit the market is to raise the best, because you get to launch your product faster rather than spend so much time in the R&D stage trying to refine on stuff. So this is something that we try to work with the company and try to help them and to make sure that they can produce a prototype in the lab and push all the way to commercialization and launch our product in the target market for. So that's the technical challenges that we typically help the companies. Probably I'll ask Dr. Dalal to talk about the other aspect, the non-technical portion, where she created a lot of sessions and helping pull a lot of connections and strings to help companies to work with them, eventually to get a lot of non-technical assistance as well.
Yeah,
Great.
thanks, Dr. Mathew. Oh, sorry, go ahead,
Before
Lucy.
you start, I wonder, do you do a lot of testing? Do you go in and taste the food as well yourselves?
Yeah, we do. We do, like for instance, we change a bit of the flavoring and then we see what has the impact on it. Like for instance, if we cook it a certain amount of temperature, then what is the taste like? Whether it be too soggy, whether we still have the crunch that is required. So there's a lot of different things that we have to work on hand to really understand what it is. So definitely tasting is something that we do. And eventually, you get a sense of achievement when at the start when you taste the product is not that good, but towards the end when they looking into commercialization and when we do our own tasting session, we get chefs to create the menu using their product. You can find out that in fact they have tremendous improvement in their products, and it really tastes so good that you can't even find out whether it's made from the meat or what. Because we know the raw ingredients, you're wondering, hey, is this made from this raw ingredients or these plant sauces? Right. So I would say that they have a lot of, good improvement, and also to make sure that the product is not what you think, like associating with the typical vegetarian product you have seen in the market. It's very starchy and it's all deep fried. So right now it's all totally a different product. You taste almost like meat, but yet it's made from plants. So that's, I think, it's a huge step up of the product development.
And how long does it take between you take it from stage A to the stage B when it's like great tasting thing?
I typically it takes a couple of months to make sure that they get the right prototype and stuff, and also get the right technology. So it takes quite a while for them to refine everything. So when we help them, it's at the start of the program, but towards the end, we spend a couple of months again to make sure that it gets better. And I would say that it takes a couple of months to refine it, to make sure that it tastes the best, and able to launch the market. So it's quite a lengthy time to think of.
Thanks.
Yeah, and just to add, it's definitely Dr. Mathew makes it sound so simple, but it's quite a complex process, and they have to go through multiple, if not hundreds, of iterations. So typically, we'll take companies, that have that we call it like a minimum viable product. So that's just the first basic product. Sometimes it will have preliminary sort of sales so that we can have some feedback from the consumer base, or sometimes just feedback internally. So in general, we want to make sure that they can utilize the right technology for them to scale up production. And something that a lot of companies will struggle with is finding, let's say, large scale manufacturers that will have those latest, cutting edge equipment. So that's something that we try to do at Big Idea Ventures, is work with the specific, let's say, co-manufacturers. We also advise them and guide them as what type of equipment they need to purchase in order to sort of work with plant-based or alternative protein companies. And we're very happy and proud that one of our investors, the Buehler Group, which is an engineering firm that designs not only food technology equipment, but a variety of engineering equipment, is now launching the world's first alternative protein plant in collaboration with Javaden, which is also an international flavor house. So in that facility, that will be an opportunity for all alternative protein companies to kind of utilize and experiment with the latest cutting edge equipment, and also with the capacity to scale up production in the future.
Right. Thank you so much. That's really interesting. And I wanted to also go a little bit back to maybe the consumer base and their perspective on these alternative proteins. So we have had a feeling over this year that consumers have started to be more conscious and started to look for more, at least content online in terms of sustainability. Some of our partners have noticed they have more traffic on their, say, blogs that deal with sustainability and sustainable living sort of advice. I want to kind of ask whether there has been any movement on the market since you're in this space of, creating new products or supporting the companies that are creating these new products. Do you think there is more appetite for investment? And also from the consumer point of view, do you think there is more appetite from the consumers to actually buy the products?
That's a really great question. I'll start from the investor side. So definitely, I think as of last year, alternative proteins have proven to be profitable for investors. And that's because of the IPO from Beyond in the US, I think it was in April last year. So, that kind of woke up everyone to really understand that, there is let's say, a new growing movement. You also have sort of very large alternative protein companies like Impossible, Just, that had been around for the same period of time, but are also doing quite well financially. So this kind of just, I guess, really woke up everyone in terms of the potential. And you can really see that, from all types of alternative protein companies in Asia and Europe. All of them are getting a lot of funding. There are a lot of sort of specialized investment firms that are dedicated towards not only food tech, but also alternative proteins, including Big Idea Ventures. We only were established last year in April, so that kind of shows you where the appetite came from. When you look at the consumer base, definitely they were the catalyst, I would say, for really driving this movement. I think, again, this really goes in line with conscious consumerism, and the growing sort of awareness that people understand the food supply system. They understand sort of the growing concerns with sustainability around meat consumption. Also, animal ethics comes into play. You have, of course, all types of environmental damage from land use, water use, and CO2 emissions or carbon emissions. And then you have, of course, the government side. So you have a huge push now from countries all over the world, but especially in Asia Pacific, where sort of the meat demand is not going to meet supply. So we have a deficit. And you can actively see countries like China, like Singapore, that are actively promoting alternative proteins and want to find solutions to be able to ensure that they have enough food security in years to come. So I think it's definitely all players working together, but it's good news for, let's say, entrepreneurs in this space that their business is very profitable at the moment, and we're sure for years to come. And hey, during the COVID pandemic, no one's out of business, especially with alternative proteins and food. So it's really a positive sign to see that it's a really resilient sector.
Great. Good news. So I think with that goes a little bit of a tricky question. And so I'm going to play the devil's advocate here a little bit, because obviously we have the conscious consumer. Now we're talking about alternative proteins. Some of them will be lab grown, but some of them will be also just a mix of different sort of sources of protein put together to look and taste and mimic the taste of meat or dairy or eggs, and etc. So like my concern or concern of other people who are more conscious would be, well, is this lab grown meat or this alternative actually healthy or healthier? Because we're going to talk about processed food, and that's what a lot of conscious consumers will be kind of wary about. I mean, they would not want to consume something that is processed, because we went through this all movement of raw and fresh, etc. So everything that is sort of preserved or even processed would be demonized in a way. So I'm just wondering, how do you deal with that, and whether you actually have an answer to whether these options are same healthy, or are there any concerns that you would want to kind of put forward, or there should be no concerns whatsoever from the consumer side?
Yeah, I could probably just start a bit on my side, on terms of looking at nutritional point of view, I think Dr. Dalal has more to come in because she really focused in this area. My take is definitely looking at the nutritional point of view. If you compare to the plant-based and the meat, you definitely look at the amount of saturated fats is significantly reduced. You don't have the saturated fats that you find in animals and use it in. Definitely the protein digestibility also should be different by looking at plant-based versus animal protein. I would say that in terms of processed food is based on the perception of the consumer as well, because processed food always deemed as very unhealthy because of the salt content, it's being overly processed and has a lot of ingredients in it. So I also do aware that consumers nowadays, they also want clean labels. They want the ingredient list to be as short as possible, and they want to know what's in the product as well. Anything that has a lot of long chemical names, they will think that is something not healthy and is going to pose some risk on their health, and that's something where they always link that to preserve or processed food. So my case, definitely look at the key ingredients, the key important, not just looking at the nutritional labels. As long as we do understand, and the point that we know what are the ingredients that is added into the product, that wants us to make sure that the product is stabilized. Because think about, like, for instance, to take a luncheon meat as one of the example, because if you don't add some ingredients in it, it won't be stabilized. You will feel that the oil starts to split out, or even look at ice cream wise. Why do you have a bit of some food ingredient added into it? Because you want ice cream to be stabilized. You don't want it to become very watery, and then eventually you can see the water and fats component split out, and that doesn't give the consumer the right texture and the requirements that they're looking for. So I think that's something that consumer has to be aware, and to make sure that they know which are the harmful or the unwanted ingredient, like preservative, is something that all probably the consumers don't want to look at. But processed food, I would say that recently a lot of portfolio companies that we have, they are looking into using good technology or processing equipments to ensure that the products that they use, they go through the right processing techniques, so that make sure it's safe and as well as stable for consumption. So they are also trying to, as much as possible, to reduce the intake of food ingredients, so they make sure that the product itself is tastes as natural it is, and then don't add any artificial flavors or even artificial flavorings as well, or all those colorings as well is quite important, because you need some colors in it. So in the olden days, they always like to add artificial. You can see a lot of those ingredients like sunset yellow, or those tartazine yellow, all those different colorings in your product. But nowadays you don't see it, because the companies, they do aware of artificial colors and try to look at it, what sort of natural ingredients they get added in to give you the richness, like for instance using beetroot powders to provide you the richness. So I would say that processed food nowadays is really different from the olden days of processed food, because the technology has evolved. The ingredient has really also evolved as well. We have very good ingredient using natural component rather than using artificial way of creating it. So I would say that my take is that nowadays the processed food is totally different. I don't think it's unhealthy, but definitely you have to bear in mind to see what is the nutritional content and so what's the ingredient. I can't say all processed food is good, but my take is always remember to look at the ingredient and the nutritional side. Probably I'll let Dr. Dalal talk more about it. I think she has also a lot to share with you guys.
Sure.
Yeah, you should never ask this question to a food scientist. We can talk about this forever. I think in general, everyone who knows me, like, I always will, like, try to assure people that there's nothing wrong with food processing, and there's nothing wrong with additives, right? Unfortunately, I think they have a lot of bad stigma in the press. We have to know that processing is to ensure food's stability and safety, right? So making sure that we can really transform the product and make sure that it has the right type of shelf life to be able to be transported overseas, or even sit on a room temperature shelf, right? So it's very important. And then when you have, of course, the additives, I really hate that word, and I always tell people that it's very important to choose positive associated words. So they're enhancers. So, like, we look for things that will enhance the texture, enhance the flavor, enhance the exactly, like enhance all aspects of the product. So, so in general, we need to make sure that first of all, consumers understand this, and then secondly, like your question about is our alternative proteins more healthy than actual, let's say, animal derivatives. Unfortunately, let's say there are certain ingredients that are not available in plants, and that's just a matter of fact. That's just based on nature itself. And of course, as human beings, we're adapted, let's say, to absorb specific nutrients from animals rather than from plants. And that's just genetic based on our evolution. But what's good to know, as well as with the processing methods, we can fortify plant-based alternatives or protein alternatives to make them have the same levels of nutrients as animal products. So to give you an example, a lot of, let's say, vegans have vitamin B12 and iron deficiencies, as well as flexitarians. So plants and let's say plant protein sources, even though they have them, but they're not as heat stable or as concentrated as animal products. So what you can see now a lot of companies are doing is they're fortifying their products with added vitamin B12 as well as iron. The same thing goes for dairy products, fortifying them with calcium, omega-3. It can go on and on. So I think in the future, what's going to happen as we get more and more sophisticated with the product development, they will have the same nutrition as animal products. But for now, we have to be, let's say, careful. And especially if you're going to go on a completely vegan diet, you have to have a very good awareness of all of the nutrients that you need to absorb. And of course, you can take supplements to kind of, to supplement whatever, you're missing in your diet. But we're very optimistic, I think, as food scientists, that the new generation of alternative protein products will have the same nutrition. It's just a matter of time, and of course scalability, making sure the facilities are available, and the awareness is there.
Great, thank you so much for the insight. I think definitely there are pros and cons always, and it really goes back to how we look at what we buy and whether we assess it, even any product that we buy. And actually food processing is, of course, this natural way of preparing food as well. We're not only eating raw vegetables or anything, even we process at home, right? So we prepare something, then it's there in the fridge for 3 days, or we make a marmalade at home, or we preserve the foods in different ways. That has been going on for a very long time. You just need to know like what is the good stuff in it and what is the bad stuff in it, I would say. So educating ourselves. That's interesting, I think, with regards to these alternative proteins and meats and eggs and cheese. So I'd like to also ask one question with regards to sustainability and whether there is any assessment on how these products compare in terms of environmental performance, in terms of greenhouse gases compared to their other products, so like regular meat. Do you think the companies, or do you do that in the Big Idea Ventures? Do you advise companies to say disclose this kind of information, use it for marketing? Do you think it's even important? So I think that would be something I want to throw there.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll take this one. So definitely, sustainability is very important for a company's ethos, their branding and marketing. I think in general it's very well established. Let's say the environmental impact of let's say growing let's say sourcing plant protein compared to animal protein. So in terms of, we call the feed to food ratio is actually very low in animals compared to plants, right? In terms of what the feed input that you inject into that agricultural system. So we know, for instance, with let's say larger mammals like cows or sheep, it's a very low ratio, but maybe for chickens it's a lot higher. And then for plants it's very high in terms of the feed that you put in and the food that you get out of it. So that's very well established. Actually, one of our portfolio companies or a lot of our portfolio companies are focused on sustainability, and one of them are also launching the world's first zero carbon plant-based protein. So it is out there, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs. They really are focused on this, as well as sort of sourcing sustainably. So that comes to sort of helping local farmers, using ugly fruits and vegetables. So I think definitely it's hand in hand with alternative proteins. It's all about sustainability. It's all about reducing, let's say, the environmental impact of consuming, let's say, animals and seafood. So yeah, I would say definitely that it's in line. And I would say in terms of an investment thesis, it's not something that we necessarily look into to invest in. But of course, for marketing, I think it's very important for the consumers. They really want to know if the founders themselves believe in this movement, if they are, let's say, practicing what they preach. So I think it's very important for anyone getting into this space that you really understand the expectations of the consumer. And and there's good news all around that alternative proteins are hand in hand with sustainability.
Great. Good to know that. Another question that I have before we move on to the Q&A, and I would encourage everybody already to start, putting your questions in the chat as we do every time. If you have anything you would like to ask Dr. Dalal or Dr. Mathew from the food nutrition perspective or sustainability, then please feel free to start thinking and putting it down there. I have one question to still explore with you, and that's obviously we're talking about sustainable hospitality, so that's more on the business side. Of course, there is the component of consumers. We all are consumers in this sustainable hospitality space or hospitality space in general. So, but for the businesses, do you think the industry is ready to adopt and adapt these alternative proteins already? And do you see any markets that are specifically open and progressing very fast, or where the growth will be? A little bit on that end to see how the alternative proteins are making their way into the hospitality industry as well, so restaurants, hotels, and chains.
Yeah, I guess my take is definitely you can see a significant growth of plant-based protein in the hospitality areas. Like look at when you want to buy a plant-based burger or plant-based meat patty, you always go to the high-end restaurants, then you're able to get the plant-based burger because this is taking down the premium of the products, and then only restaurants get or top-notch restaurants you get to try the plant-based product. So now you can look at it at the shift of it from looking at those high-end restaurants. They're pushing also all the way down to the mid tier, where people can get a lot of this plant-based products from even the quick service line, like your McDonald's, your different fast food chains. You are able to also try using plant-based alternative to get the burgers. That's also looking at how much this has been changed, or how fast the industry adopts plant-based products as well. Even right now, not only you get to buy it from the hospitality area, like from food services or from restaurants and cafe, you look at even supermarkets, they also start to sell products where the consumer can just buy it and then bring it back home to cook it and have their own plant-based meal. So I would say that definitely the industry is moving towards the adoption of the plant-based, and definitely it also links back to the demand from the consumer, because consumer has to create a demand before the companies are able to create more plant-based option or even more plant-based products. And then this goes down to different distribution channels, or even getting the hospitality regions to adopt more plant-based product. So I would say that the industry are moving ahead as well. They're trying all ways to look into manufacturing and to help companies to see how they can help to create more plant-based product. So you have seen like even in Singapore, there's this just that they are going to build a egg plant in Singapore that produce plant-based egg, and this is quite a big move to have such a big. Just to come in Singapore to invest so much money to create a plant that just to create plant-based egg. So you can see that this is something that is changing the industry, to say that hey, we really are aware the demand of what the consumer needs in terms of plant-based, and we need to set up facilities that we can help them to manufacture or to create a product. Like even China itself, like Nestle also put a lot of money to create their own manufacturing line, so that to make sure that they can also produce the demand of the plant-based products that's required. So I would say the demands from the consumer works very hand in hand with what the industry needs. As long as the demand that's required, the industry will definitely try to position themselves and to adopt how they can also produce more interesting plant-based product, or even different variety of plant-based product. You can get your nuggets, your sausage, your patty, even all the way down to your milk, your cheese. You can have artisanal type of cheese, or your cheddar cheese, or your mozzarella cheese. So I would say there's a lot of different areas that the industry is working towards it and trying to make sure that they create the not just taste good, but also is in terms of nutritional wise, it's also giving the right nutritional content to the consumer. So yep, I do believe in more years to come, you get to see more plant-based product in restaurants, in cafe, and even those. I have not seen most in Singapore, those hawker centers, those coffee shops. I have not seen it yet, but I do feel that in times to go, you might be able to see like plant-based products in the traditional coffee shops, or even the hawker centers you see. Yeah.
Your just carrot cake. Right.
Yeah, the carrot cake, maybe you can have a bit of the minced pork, or you can have something onto your carrot cake by using plant-based. So yeah. Great. So it's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. If I could just add also one more thing. So this is something quite interesting for, let's say, the go-to market strategy of a lot of alternative protein companies. So actually, rather than targeting, let's say, retail, they look at distribution services like hospitality. And the reason why they do this is because, you know, with their products, as they're sort of new, they would rather have sort of chefs that they can train from that, you know, say hospitality or catering company. And then, you know, once they understand how to work with it, they can then sort of create dishes out of them. So it helps the company, number one, of course, you know, gain access to the market. And the second part is that they can then further improve and work on future iterations of the product. So that, you know, works in hand. What you're seeing now as well for a lot of catering companies, especially ones that target schools or even offices, is there's a growing demand for meat alternatives, or let's say vegan alternatives. So there is a huge opportunity. And I think a lot of catering companies, especially the ones that we work with, like Compass and Sodexo, are really excited to see what's coming and excited to work with these companies going forward. So definitely, like hospitality, they have been working with alternative proteins from the very start. And you have companies like Impossible and Beyond that actually started showcasing with these groups, and they gave them that platform for the, let's say, the first initial exposure. And then once they were able to tweak and modify the recipe, then they sort of moved on to the retail. So definitely there's a huge opportunity for hospitality.
So I'd like to encourage the questions now from the audience, and while we wait for those questions to pour in, hopefully you've got interesting questions that you would like to learn about the alternative proteins, the market, the hospitality industry, connection to it. I have one thing that just popped in my mind now was, or the observation rather than a question, is that I have definitely encountered a lot more alternative protein in the form of meat, right? So like Impossible Burger, in our conference 2019, we actually served Impossible meatballs. So all our catering was vegetarian and vegan. So we had no meat, and actually the hospitality group that we worked with actually had on their menu Impossible meat. So we had a dish from Impossible meat, which was very well received, by the way, by the delegates. So they were really pleased with the taste, and I really could not think that it was actually not a meat. But yeah, having said that, that's really a lot of meat, right? So meat alternatives, and it's mostly the plant-based ones. I have not seen yet on the market or anywhere the lab grown meat or other things than sort of burgers or omni pork. There's definitely very little penetration, I would say, for the egg alternatives or the cheese. So there are definitely small producers of vegan cheese, right? The small producers, but I have never been very satisfied with the taste, to be honest, or the texture of it, which I think a lot of vegetarians or vegans would concur with, that it's not there, right? And we don't have the varieties yet of like, this is cheddar and this is mozzarella. So I think there has to be definitely much more innovation done in that space so that we can have the palette and variety of tastes and flavors, especially for cheese. But I have not seen that on menus much, unless you're a very specialized restaurant that is vegan or vegetarian, then you would have that. But I haven't seen much of a penetration of those other products like dairy on the market.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think, well, but first of all, I guess for dairy and also for, let's say, egg alternatives, the main issue, of course, will be price points. So, let's say for food services or anyone, and even for alternative proteins, the price points for meat, sorry, the price points are very high. But I think in general, what you have with meat alternatives is that, as a mince, it's very versatile. So you can make burgers, you can make dumplings, you can make pulled, versions. And then in terms of the dish application, it's quite diverse and it's quite stable. And depending on the seasoning, you can adapt it to any type of cuisine. When it comes to, let's say, dairy, in terms of the functional properties, so like if you look at animal milk, right? It has very unique functional properties that lets it withstand baking, cooking. It can be used in sort of, your coffee, lattes. It's just so diverse and everyone understands how to use it. When it comes to the plant-based alternatives, then you have other issues, right? Like sometimes it curdles, especially under high temperature. It might not have the same applications when you bake it, so used in baked goods, in the confectionery and those kind of sectors. So it still needs some time. And the same thing with eggs, right? An egg is so unique, right? Because you have the egg white, you have the egg yolk, and each of them have their own functional properties. A lot of the sort of the plant-based egg versions are a combination. So they're like a scramble. And sometimes they come out in fully formed packs. Sometimes it's just in a liquid form. So again, it's price points, it's the utilization, the functionality. These will all play a part. But again, with meat, I guess in terms of the price points, it's more attractive because they can sell more. But maybe for eggs, there's a lot of limitations with the functionality with eggs and milk.
Right. So I've got a first question from the audience, and I'd like to encourage anybody who has questions to start putting them down in the chat. So there's a question about fish. So fish is also a huge source of protein, and I think fish, especially in Asia, and it's like a protein for a lot of nations in Asia that don't have really access to other types of protein. There's lots of coastline, obviously, so it is sort of a indigenous sort of protein for lots, besides of course seafood. So it's also a huge source of protein, and there doesn't seem to be many alternatives for seafood products out there so far, or not known to us or the general public. So are there any companies researching or producing plant-based alternatives with regards to fish and seafood that you know of?
Yeah. There is companies out there that looks into plant-based fish, like for instance tuna, looking at salmon and see how they can incorporate all this, because fish in terms of seafood, like salmon, you have the omega-3 fatty acid that comes into it, and this typically found from fishes. So a lot of companies are looking into getting omega-3 from microalgae and see how they can extract this from it and incorporate into a product so that the end product, also like plant-based salmon or plant-based tuna, get the right flavor that's required and also get the right omega-3 that is usually found in a piece of salmon. The only tricky portion that companies are always working out is the texture, because to create a texture of a beef, a pork, a chicken is definitely different from a fish, because fish looks to be more flaky and it's not as fibrous as it is, and you don't have to chew that long to really break the pieces down. So that's why they do look into different processing techniques like extrusion and see how they can really help to break it down easily and how to make sure the texture mimics more of a fish or rather than a chicken or a beef. So yes, I do see a lot of companies looking into tuna, like those canned tunas that you have been looking at. And right now they look at plant-based option, looking at different processing technique, creating their own tuna base, having different flavors, like you can have your tuna in oil, where you can do your tuna sandwich, or you can have those flavored tunas and for people to use it. There's some companies very interesting as well. What they did is they also create sashimi using a plant-based option. So they create those pieces of sashimi, like from a tuna sashimi or salmon sashimi, or even unagi, in the point of how they can use different plant-based option to create it. So all these companies, they are very innovative, and to see how they can use different options and different fruits or vegetables to achieve that the texture of a sashimi that is required, because sashimi is more like a bit of jelly, while yet you have a firm texture of the fish. but they're using a different vegetables or different plant source, and they see what sort of processes that they require, maybe like curing or something that they can do so that they can mimic your texture. So yes, there are companies out there that do works with a lot on the seafood area, on tuna, salmon, the sashimi grade, or even looking at shrimps as well. So yeah, it's just that more work has to be done. It's just that the process is going to be slightly different from producing a plant-based meat. But I would say it's possible to look at. So far, I've seen tuna, salmon, shrimps, and even sashimi. But I believe there's more to go in the future as well.
I've seen here in Hong Kong at one of the events last year, I think was a food summit, and one of the companies presented a fish maw. So it's like a part of that is not plant-based though. So that was a lab grown. And so they started developing that, and I think they have few other products that were kind of trying to grow in a lab. And so they started with that because it's a more expensive product. So it would be easier to say recover the cost of like developing that and then offer it on the market rather than starting with something that is super popular, like say just tuna can, right? But I would be very excited to have the tuna fish in a can that is not tuna fish. But I'd love to have also the steak, right? So I'd love to have like a tuna steak that is not from tuna fish because I love the flavor and the taste of it. That's really interesting. I hope that's going to be more innovation to come from there for our fish lovers and then seafood lovers. So because now we're talking about the plant-based and also the lab grown, do you think for things like sashimi, wouldn't it be easier to lab grow because of the specific texture, because it's actually raw meat, right? That is probably very difficult to create from plants, I would assume.
I think in general, everything is easier than lab grown. So the issue with lab grown is, they have a lot of hurdles. Everything, of course, you can create, let's say, an initial prototype, and this can be like a very small sample size. So let's say cell-based companies, they have a lot of obstacles from, let's say, reducing the cost of production, from scaling up the technology. So as of now, like no one has successfully mass produced any type of cell-based product. You have, of course, companies like Shock Meat have just announced plans to start the first cell-based pilot plant in Singapore. So that's just about to kind of launch, and we'll see the outcomes in a few years' time, I would say. And then you have, of course, for all of the cell-based companies, the regulatory hurdles. So there's going to be a long, long battle, with, let's say, food regulatory bodies, with the animal lobby, making sure, of course, that this is so safe that, everything in the production line is, safe for human consumption. Most likely there's going to be trials on humans to make sure that it is, edible and that the nutrient sort of conversion is fine. So it's going to take a long time. And of course, a lot of these companies are showing great promise because they're able to successfully grow, let's say different cell lines and create very unique products out of them. But as you mentioned, Avant Meat that launched last year in Hong Kong. So, targeting more premium products is the best way for these cell-based companies to, quickly sort of cover the R&D costs and remain, as viable businesses. But in terms of the regulatory process, it's going to take a very long time. We're very optimistic here in Asia that it will be faster than our counterparts in the US and in Europe, just because let's say the regulatory process is simpler, as well as the lobbying system is not as complex. Where in Europe and also in North America, you have a lot of sort of legacy meat and dairy companies that are going to oppose or ask for stricter guidelines. So in general, yeah, plant-based is always easier. So if you want to see your products out in the market, go for that. For cell-based, we're all waiting anxiously to see when things will be approved. But I think conservatively, it's going to take at least 5 years.
Right. So we're coming to the end, but I would like to see whether there are any more questions from the audience. I think this is a very unique topic that we have discussed and very interesting. I could go on for another hour for sure. But I think it was a great overview of the plant-based versus lab-grown, and also what is out there and how actually the hospitality industry has been pioneering this space together with the innovators as the first adopters of these new products and bringing them to the consumers to maybe try and test before they buy it for home. I don't see any questions coming through. I think everybody's very shy today or does not really have any questions because the topic is so novel. But if we receive anything, of course, we'll be happy to forward it. But I would like to thank you very much for your participation, for sharing your knowledge. And one last question before we wrap up, I want to ask you, which one is your favorite product? Your favorite plant-based product? We can cut this out. There's no promotion. We have no interest in promoting one company over another. Do you have your favorite?
Yeah, I do have a favorite. I mean, definitely we do have some favorites of all, but it's always, I think is, my take is as long it provides me the texture and the flavor of the meat, that's going to be my favorite because I do eat meat a lot. So for my case, to cut down my meat intake, I definitely relies on this plant-based products to eat on. So I do have quite I mean, I can't really pick one, but it's the way that I was very impressed by a lot of our portfolio companies by having a product that's produced using plant-based ingredient, but when you eat it, you don't even relate well with the ingredients that state on the label. So that's something that I feel is really good. So yeah, that's my take. And I was quite impressed at how plant-based product has been growing over the years.
Any favorites for you, Dalal? do you cook at home something? Burgers, plant-based burgers?
Actually, I don't cook plant-based products at home. I usually eat them out. I think for me, let's say, of course, I love all of our portfolio companies and preference to them. But I would say in terms of one of my favorites, not only because of the product but also the company's mission, would be Impossible. And the reason for that is really because they were one of the first companies to showcase sort of a very sort of unique way of like finding novel ingredients and incorporating them into the plant-based product. So, their discovery of, leg hemoglobin and then kind of pushing it to the US FDA and getting it certified as an approved novel food ingredient or GRAS certified, which is called generally recognized as safe, is a huge achievement. And of course, the reason why they did this is because this ingredient actually contains iron. And of course, it also helps create the flavor and the color that we associate with beef. So that bloody, sort of texture, bloody taste or irony taste. So I think that's like really amazing to show that science and food are compatible and sort of innovation is compatible with food. And they just created a really tasty product and a successful, viable business. So they're one of the first movers among many, but they're one of my favorites, I would say.
So thank you so much for sharing these innovative ideas. Hopefully that inspires also our participants in the hackathon. If you would like to participate, make sure that you do so. Approach us, look at our website, subscribe to the newsletter, whichever form you prefer. And also make sure that you respond to our survey so we know how we can do better. What topics would you like to hear about in the future so that we can bring the interesting speakers to share more about the sustainability of the hospitality industry and the future. Thank you so much, Mathew. Thank you so much, Dalal.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Lucia. Thanks, everyone.
Have a nice evening. Have a nice evening, everybody.